Well, a very warm welcome this evening, this lovely warm evening, to the Business School and to this inaugural lecture. My name's Dorothy Meal. I'm the Head of College of Humanities and Social Science, and I'm really pleased to be able to welcome you all here. I remember Paolo's interview really well. It's one of those that's seared in my mind because of how unusual and exciting the ideas that he put forward before us that day were. He laid out a set of possibilities for some innovative new connections and ideas that was absolutely irresistible. And so we were delighted to offer him the post after the interview, and even more delighted when he joined us in June 2013 as Professor of Accounting, Governance and Social Innovation. And I think since then, since his appointment, he's really lived up to those early expectations and promise. We've been particularly keen, we've just been talking about the connections he's made through IASH, our Institute of Advanced Studies in Humanities, with colleagues in the School of Divinity, School of Literatures, Languages and Cultures, Social and Political Sciences, and the Human Business Initiative that at Edinburgh that he's set up has been something that's been really groundbreaking in terms of setting up new opportunities across the college. His ideas to bridge business and the humanities have been not only groundbreaking here at Edinburgh, but have been fantastic for opening up some real interesting international connections. And he's been asked to speak about the interface between the business and the humanities at a number of very prestigious international universities. So at Stanford Humanities Center, the Mahindra Humanities Center at Harvard, the Heyman Center for the Humanities at Columbia, and the Bruce Initiative for the Rethinking of Capitalism at the University of California, Santa Cruz. So this incredibly interesting range of achievements comes from Paolo's research interests in the emergence and diffusion of accounting and business knowledge in both historical and contemporary contexts. And he's particularly interested in the role that both visualizations and rhetorical devices play in management practices. And as you'll have guessed by now, in his research he combines insights from literature, history, sociology, philosophy, and science and technology studies. But he began his career by studying business economics and law at the University of Palermo, and then qualified as a certified accountant and auditor before taking a doctorate in accounting and management from the University of Catania. After a period as the first Marie Curie postdoctoral research fellow in accounting in Europe at the University of Manchester, he then went on to jobs as a lecturer and reader in Madrid and at Oxford. And he joined us here at Edinburgh from the position of Professor of Accounting and Management Control at the IE Business School of Madrid. He's been recognised internationally for the fascinating research that he's done and has been visiting professor at many prestigious academic institutions, at Stanford, at Copenhagen Business School, at Bocconi in Milan, at Kyoto in Japan. And he still maintains an association with Oxford as an associate fellow of the business school there and as honorary senior research associate of Italian Studies, which was a research centre that he set up during his time at Oxford. His work's been picked up by the international press, most recently by the Financial Times, but, with his analysis of the administrative and accounting practices in the Jesuit order. So I think I've said enough to make us all very keen to hear this inaugural lecture with this interesting title, Accounting, Governance and Social Innovation, Establishing the Links. And I'd now like to invite Paolo to come and give us that talk.
Thank you, Dorothy, for this excellent introduction. Very nice words. And thanks to all of you for being here today. It's a great honor for me. I have to admit I'm a bit nervous today, not only because this is, I talked to my distinguished colleagues here and to other people who came, but also and especially because this is the first time that I give a public lecture in front of my family. And so there are my two daughters there, Victoria and Carolina, and above all, my wife, Sabrina. And so I better do this well because otherwise I cannot go back home. So when I was appointed, Ian asked me, Paolo, what title should we choose for your chair? And at that time I thought, accounting, governance and social innovation is a great thing to study. And he was very enthusiastic about that. And he said yes. And I was very happy at that point, but now I'm stuck with it and I have to understand what that means. And so this is why establishing the links. So trying to establish links between things that are not immediately linked, accounting and governance possibly, but why social innovation. So I think that the lecture, most of this lecture today, will be about the power of numbers. Numbers are powerful because they convince people that they are right. There is Theodore Porter, who wrote an entire book on how we end up trusting numbers. And I think that in management, we use a lot of these vignettes or cartoons from Al Dilbert that explain very, very, very strongly how numbers are powerful. And here you have an example. I didn't have any accurate numbers, so I just made up this one. Studies have shown that accurate numbers aren't any more useful than the ones you make up. And then normally when you give a lecture in an MBA class, an MBA would ask you this question. How many studies show that? 87. End of conversation, okay? So numbers have, and accounting in particular, have the power to close the discussion. But I want to, and science in general, I mean, you are either right or wrong, and so end of conversation. While I'm interested instead not only in how numbers create beliefs and make people believers, but also how numbers can be used for opening up discussions and conversations. My take on that is let's say, not based in economics at all. I'm, as Dorothy said, I'm interested in the humanities quite a lot, possibly also because of my training. I did classics during my high school. And so I start to explain this power of numbers in both directions of convincing people that things are right and enabling people in innovating things, or to establish conversations, or to question the beliefs that the numbers contribute to create by looking at the history of accounting and looking in particular at the links between accounting, rhetoric, and the art of memory. And you may think, oh, this is pretty odd. Accounting is all about numbers, it's all about economics. Well, not exactly. I've done some historical work where some other people had shown how the word inventory comes from inventio, which is the first canon of rhetoric. In particular, Bruce Carruthers and Wendy Espeland, or other people like James Howe. But they were using rhetoric to show how accounting is used as a persuasive tool, as something that persuades people without any ground behind. Actually, the work that I've done shows that the link between accounting, rhetoric, and the art of memory is much more profound. Not many people know, for instance, that the first book where the accruals, which is a very important technique for keeping the accounts. The book that describes for the first time the accruals was written by a Jesuit. I will mention the Jesuits quite a few times during this lecture. And that book was organized in 3 parts. The first part was dell'inventario, about the inventory. So it comes from inventio, first canon of rhetoric. What you do, you organize things in spaces. This is what you do when you do the inventio to organize a talk, for instance, and to deliver a talk. But this is also what we accountants do when we have to organize the administration of a firm. We create accounts, we create spaces, and we put things in it. The second part of that book was called Dell'ordinazione e disposizione dei conti, of the ordination and disposition of the accounts. So once you have created these spaces, you have to order them and you have to dispose them. in order to solve the problems that you have to solve. The second part of that book was called dell'ordinazione e disposizione dei conti, of the ordination and disposition of the accounts. And the second canon of rhetoric is dispositio and ordinatio and dispositio. Then the third canon of rhetoric is elocutio, the style that you choose when you have to communicate your results, or when you have to communicate your talk, or when you have to speak in public. And the third part of that book was about the style that you choose when you have to communicate the results. So there is a strong link between historical link with, I don't like the word fact, but with factual history, that shows that accounting emerges as the translation of some humanist techniques into a new realm that was that of administration. And while I was doing this, was trying to build these links between accounting rhetoric and accounting rhetoric and memory to then discuss issues of social innovation, I came across this plan of a church. At that time, I was interested in how books as object attract the reader. How is that a person who is not an accountant opens a book and learns accounting? So what are the technical features of that object that engage the user? And I came across this picture, which is a picture of a church in France, and you can see there that you may enter the building from there, and then you have to do certain things, and if you do certain things, then you are transformed into a believer. What are the things that you have to do? You enter the church, and immediately you have the echo that puts you in a different space. Then you go into a space again, which is a chapel there, and you may look at some frescoes on the wall. Then you go to another chapel and you touch the relic of the saint. Then you go to the center of the nave, and for instance, if you go to Rome, or maybe you have been already to this church, go to the main church of the Jesuits, the church of Jesuits. There is a big dome there with a round stone perpendicular to the dome, and the idea is that you stay there, you put yourself in this very strange, awkward situation, you follow the frescoes, and wow, you are taken up to God. So the church works as a machine to construct believers, to make believers. Then you go to another chapel, you confess your sins, and at the end, if you do all these steps correctly, you get an illumination, a vision of God. Guess how that vision of God was called? That vision of God was called theoria, a theory, from theos, God, and theorein. And so when I saw this, I thought, oh my God, this is a PhD in accounting and finance. What you do, you take the first course in maybe econometrics, then you do finance 1, then you do advanced statistics, then you go to a conference and look up your gurus, then you confess your sins because you go back home, you have a nightmare and you think that the rational man doesn't exist, is irrational, and on top of that is a woman. And so you confess your sins to your supervisor, who tells you, go back and reread Berlin Means, and at the end you get a theoria, you believe in Black and Scholes. It was not an encounter that I made by chance. I was studying books and I encountered a church. It was not a casual encounter because at that time churches were used as texts that could be read by the illiterate, by those who could not read. They were part of a series of what they were called at that time rhetorical machines. So machine from Latin machina, because they helped to build knowledge. Rhetorical machines could be spaces, rhetorical machines could be most of the visualizations that we use nowadays in management, like hierarchies, wheels, grids, histograms. They were pictures or visualizations that were, most of them, invented in between late medieval times and early modern times to help you to meditate and to figure out knowledge. This church also shows a different way of constructing beliefs. This is taken by a book by Mary Carruthers, and she makes this distinction between orthopraxis and orthodoxy. So you can get knowledge by reading a book, and that is the orthodoxy of the text. This is why in Oxford they say, I read economics and management, because the idea is that I go to the library and I read the book where the truth is. Or I can experience truth by doing certain rituals, and this is the idea of orthopraxis. And by doing certain rituals, like a PhD in accounting and finance, you get an illumination. There are quite a few cues that contribute to establish this link between accounting, rhetoric, and the art of memory. I told you about inventory, but also record comes from recordo, that means to remember. Formula comes from forma, which is a technique to memorize things. Calculate, rationality comes from calculus. Ratio, that means account. As a Benedictine accountant said in 1586, accounting numbers are figures. They are in English. In the English language, you can still call a number a figure. In Italian, we no longer call a number a figura. But that is typical of how a medieval accountant or an early modern accountant would try to solve problems. You create figures, which are accounts, and then you move these pictures around to find a solution. If you have seen the Da Vinci Code, which is an awful film for any historian, but there is one scene that is quite interesting when Tom Hanks is trying to break the cryptex. What he does, he composes an image, he composes images, and he composes a vision of the Last Supper, and he assigns a number to each figure in the Last Supper, and then moves these figures around. This is how an early modern accountant would try to solve problems. The interesting thing there, or at that time, is that actually accounting, but also in a sense religion, was not really about truth, was about the invention of truth as well. Inventio, that word that I mentioned before, originates two words. One is inventory, you do the classification. The other one is invention. So every time that you re-enter the church, you can change your path, and you reinvent the notion of God. Accounting is therefore linked to humanities, is linked to these images, which are images that make people do things. They are imagines agentes. And numbers are not, for them, they were not representations, because the idea of representation was not even invented at that time. But they were instruments of composition, instruments of imagining the future more than representing the past. They were also instruments to make links between things that were not linked. And accounting has got this ability, this power of making links. Account comes from, in Latin, is called ratio, and ratio means a proportion. So what accounting does is to establish links, but to establish links in a way that is always proportioned and symmetrical. And here there is an idea that comes from Latour. He talks about the idea of society as the links, the ties amongst the members of that society, amongst the socie. What accounting does is exactly that. What it does is to establish and to I'll go to the end, to establish and manage relationships amongst different members of a society. What accounting, the way in which accounting does these links or build these links is also in a way that you always have to be balanced. You always have to be in a state that, as we will see in a moment, is almost of indifference. So this is why when you have to govern organizations, checks and balances are so important. The other thing, you may have noticed that the notion of ratio originates the modern word of rationality. But for them, given that a representation was impossible, given that facts were never there, decisions were never rational. At best, they could be reasonable. Okay, so they were, all of these instruments, all of these visualizations, including accounts, were instruments not to make rational choices, but to make choices that were reasonable, knowing that the perfect choice could not be achieved because we are not God. Accounting, this is a paper that I'm working with a colleague, François Pouillou. We're doing a history of accounting from the Roman times until modernity, of course, in 25 pages. Accounting is an instrument to manage these ties that are made in economies and society. It's the space, the virtual space where these relationships are managed. Just to give you an idea, in Roman times you had to present the accounts every 5 years, and if you were a slave, for instance, managing a farm, but you could show through the accounts that you did well, you were made part of the society. So they established a link with the slave, and they made the slave a citizen. Now, those who know what I do know that I cannot really give a lecture without talking about the Jesuits. And so here is my best slide about the Jesuits. Now, the reason is exactly that the Jesuits are pioneers in quite a few accounting innovations, which are still used nowadays. But they were smarter than contemporary accountants. So they were quite eclectic in how they used technologies. You have to think that for them accounting was almost like having an iPhone. It was a new thing. It was invented only a few decades before, or at least formalized a few decades before, or even less than 100 years before the Jesuits were constituted. And so they said, okay, we can use this wonderful technology, but if we are very well aware of the fact that when we transfer or we transform the complexity of the real world into numbers, we make that complexity very simple. We reduce the complexity very much. And therefore, they, for instance, devised interesting ways of managing the cash account. Because if you look at a cash account, you see cash that goes in and cash that goes out. And you think, this is all about money. The underlying transaction is all about money. It's all about cash. The most in finance, I look at my finance colleagues at the back, the ultimate true thing is cash. So you think this is all about cash. And they said, no, it's actually never just about cash. It's never just about finances. So what they did, they operated the cash account with two keys. One that was kept by the procurator and one that was kept by the rector. They established a division. And division is an interesting word there because it comes from de, which means to be about, and vision, which means to see. So if you want to see things well, you split them in two in a way that they are opposite. So when you do analysis, you break things down, and if you want to see things better, you actually split them in two. And in two parts, which have a completely opposite interest. Here we have the procurator, an accountant, so interested in financial matters, and you have the rector, who is interested in anything else, what is not a financial matter. So the fact that each of them had a key, and the fact that they could not even write an entry on that account if they didn't meet and discuss what they were doing, had some implications. The first of these implications was that accounting was more a means of reflection rather than a means of representation. So once the number was written on the account, all the reflection, all the decisions had already been done. The number is not used as the starting point of the decision making. It's the end of the decision making. So numbers do not speak for themselves, and therefore we have to talk about them. And this is what this did. So accounting at that time was not used to get answers on what the right path of action would be, but it was actually an instrument through which you would question the things that you were doing. Are we cashing this for the right reason or not? Are we spending money for the right reason or not? And you do that by putting two people in tension. Okay, and intention is another interesting word, because nowadays when we have intentions, we believe that we have to go straight in one direction. So this is my intention, this is my objective. For them, intention meant always to be intention. We do not know exactly where we are going, and so we have to discuss where we are going. Second implication of that is that it forced a communication between the procurator and the rector. So they had opposite interests. One was finance, one was anything but finance. And so that means that every transaction always implied a conversation about what it was not finance. So you use numbers to open up a conversation, not to close it down, not to reduce it to one single aspect of managing a business. And then the third thing that is quite relevant is the fact that they were putting emphasis on crafting numbers rather than what we nowadays have, which is the automation of data. Because nowadays what we do is that we consume financial data as we eat or we buy snacks in a supermarket without knowing exactly what we are consuming. So we go to a supermarket, we buy a snack, we eat it. Possibly there are also some information about what we are eating, but there is no any information on whether that is the right snack for us. The same thing in accounting and finance. You have all the financial accounting standards that tell you what is in that account, but it doesn't tell you whether that is the right kind of account that you need to eat, that you need to consume. Here, they avoided this frenzy of being, in a sense, made believers by numbers. And accounting was about strategizing, it was about mediating, it was also about this very Jesuit idea of being indifferent. I understood this year when I'm not a Catholic, my wife can testify, I'm not a very religious person. But this year the Pope, when he was on St. Peter's Square, when he was there, when he was elected, he said a very interesting thing that was this. Okay, buonasera, first of all, nice to see you here. Now let's have 15 seconds of silence, and you pray for me. So I attract in that empty all the difference which is in that square. And so we are all different, but we believe that we belong to the same church. And the Jesuits did this regularly. They wanted to be indifferent. So their motto was perinde ac cadaver esset, which means I have to be indifferent. The only way in which I can engage the difference around me is not to be unbalanced. I have to be balanced. That is the key to wisdom. If I like too much money, I then forget about other issues. If I like too much environmental issues, I forget about money. So I always have to be indifferent, because that is the only way in which I can enjoy the difference and engage the difference around me. Here there is another example. I'm Italian, so quite a few Italian examples. I'm glad that I was on time, and so you know, those who were late were not Italians today. Here there is another Italian example of how accounting helps to make links amongst different parties or stakeholders in society. This is IRI, the largest Italian state-owned enterprise, which was privatized in the 90s. IRI, after the Second World War, was the arm in Italy of the Marshall Plan. The Marshall Plan is that plan through which the United States poured into Europe money to help the reconstruction. IRI was so big that there is a story that goes like this. If you are a tourist in the 60s and you go to Italy, you would go there either by plane, and that plane would be owned by Alitalia, which was owned by Erie, or by a boat, and that boat would have been built by Fincantieri, and Fincantieri was owned by Erie. Then you take a motorway, that motorway would have been built by Erie. Then you stop at the petrol station, that petrol station would have been owned by Eni, which is another state-owned corporation. Then you make a phone call, and the company that ran the phone calls in Italy would have been owned by Erie. So Erie, Eni and Enel were managing several points of Italian GDP during the 60s. And when you get money from the States, this money never comes for free. And so the idea was this in the mind of the Americans. They said, okay, this is what we're going to do, guys. We give you the money. We give you the knowledge, the business knowledge to turn around the firms that you own, and then we sell them on the market. And the Italians at that time were a bit smarter than now, and they said, look, I don't think that this is going to work. I don't think this is going to work for two reasons. First, if we are going to turn around these firms and sell them on the market, who is going to buy them? You, because we don't have money. So this is not possible. Second thing, so this is how you structure your income statement. You structure your income statement with the profit at the bottom, which means that is the most important thing. And that is the means, that is the end and not the means. For us, mostly of them were actually Catholic. Profit is a means to an end, and that end is the common good. So we don't like that structure of income statement, and so they devised a different structure of income statement that had value added as their main result, their main bottom line. Under this structure, for instance, salaries are not a cost anymore. They are part of the distribution of value added. And then part of this value added goes to banks, the states, shareholders, and the firm. Why is this important? This is important only because this statement allows the mediation between the production and distribution of value. But it's important because it helps to build different kind of socie-ties. So we cannot really do social innovation nowadays if we do not change the way in which we organize the production and distribution of value among society. That is the only real social innovation that counts. You can talk about strategy, you can talk about values, you can talk about anything else, but in contemporary times, the only thing that matters is actually money. So unless we develop a different system of building ties through calculative practice that have money as their main interest, we are not really doing any kind of social innovation. So accounting is important in relation to social innovation because it can help to build different ties amongst different parties in the economy and in society. If you structure the income statement with the value added, you have a different kind of society compared to another kind of society where the income statement has got profit or the state or tax at the bottom line. Now, given that accounting is a space where you have mediation, social innovation, economic development, you need to govern the action and processes that happen on this space. And so accounts are spaces for governance. And here there is a comparison between two different systems of governance. One is corporate. This comes from my experience at Oxford. And one is corporate, and you have the board at the top where 3, 4, possibly 5 people are making decisions, and then you have layers of people who transform this information and command and control down to the hierarchy. And you may wonder what this red spot is, the red spot that is flashing there is. Oops. That red spot would be in an academic department or in a university, would be a member of faculty, who is so low in the hierarchy that nowadays doesn't count anymore. Okay? So that is corporate, and many business schools now emulate corporate governance. And I want to compare that with the governance structure and processes that instead the college where I was, Christchurch, had in place. And that is particularly important because space is important for this governance. First of all, the meeting where governing body met happened in a room where which was a square room with a table that was squared. And in that square table, there were some posts that were signposted. So here, there is the place of the dean. Okay, this is a very formal occasion. It happens every other Wednesday at 2 o'clock. You have to sit there 5 minutes before 2 because you put your gown on, because the dean arrives at 2. Everyone needs to be seated. When he enters, everyone stands up and he says, oh, please stand down. But if you don't actually stand up, he looks at you and says, what the hell are you doing? So very formal environment. So the dean at Christchurch Christchurch is a college of royal foundation. So he is nominated by the Queen. So the dean, the Queen, who is chosen by God. Okay, so that is the line. And if you enter Christchurch, the big hall, you will see this in the symbology of the big hall, which is where Harry Potter was filmed. You will have high table. The president sits there. If the dean is presiding high table, would be the dean, then a bust of the Queen on top of his head, then a portrait of Henry VIII, and then a Gothic window pointing towards God. And I promised to do a bit of show today, and I also want to offer a tribute to Randy Martin, who is was professor of politics and art at New York. He taught me the relationship between finance and dance. And he said, he was giving this talk at the conference for Rethinking Capitalism, and he said, you know why we have different figures in dance? Classical dance, you do this, you are in line with God. So there is God, the Queen, the Dean of Christchurch. Then you have Enlightenment. You have this, and so you trust in the human being, you point the way, we're going that way. And then you have postmodernism. There is no center anymore, okay? And he was talking about derivatives in that occasion. So here, this is clearly a relationship between the Dean of Christchurch and God, celestial matters. Who sits opposite to these celestial matters? Who sits opposite to the Dean? Who sits opposite to the Dean? The bursar, the treasurer, okay? A clear opposition between celestial matters and dirty stuff, money, okay? So a clear tension between the two things. And colleges at Oxford don't work if the two collide, if they are friends. Then, this is an instrument to question the rationale of the operations of the college. While here, things percolate down. Here, what needs to percolate in different directions needs to be discussed and scrutinized. And this, that academics, including myself, I know that I'm talking already too much, like talking. And so they talk and talk and talk. They spend hours talking about the color of the carpet of the senior common room. And I couldn't understand why that was the case. Then I understood this after a few years. So here sits the steward, who is the head of the operations. So you can talk forever, but I have to put 2,000 people, I have to have a college ball with 2,000 people there in 3 months. If you don't tell me what to do, I will not do it, because this is a very dangerous thing. We have to be pragmatic. Some people could die, get drunk and die, and we don't want to lose face. So this is the pragmatic aspect. Then you have senior censor and junior censor. The senior censor and junior censors are chosen in a secret meeting where all the previous senior censors meet and they decide who is going to be the next. So here you have a nice combination of transparency. So this is every decision comes to governing body to make it transparent, but there is also opacity there. Then you have the representative of the church, of the cathedral. And then you have, with gowns, all the members of staff. For the first 3 years, I was sitting here. with my gown. I was sitting there because it was next to the door, because I thought that this was crazy. And I thought that I could leave. I was so naive. I'm from Palermo in the end, right? So I was so naive, I thought, okay, if this becomes boring, I'll just leave. I didn't understand if you enter, you cannot really leave. After 3 years, when I started to like this, I moved there close to the tutor in politics because he was an expert in Italian politics and I could have a better view. Now, what are the pros and cons of these two systems? I think that there are quite a few. You can understand I have a slightly privilege for this rather than that. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, oh, but here decisions are taken very slow. I mean, if you have to, in the contemporary environment, you have to be, only few people take decisions and then boom, this is percolated down. But yes and no. First of all, around this table, there are people who are recognized as wise because they have proved during their life in college that they would never take a decision in their own interest. They have always proved that the decisions that they take is taken in the interest of the institution, not in their self-interest. So these 4 or 5 people, exactly the same 4 or 5 who sit there, can actually take decisions that then are ratified by the body, but they have to constantly be careful that these decisions are not interpreted as decisions that go into their own favor. Then the other thing, remember where we started. We started by saying that this lecture was about the power of numbers and how we construct beliefs. Here, this machine, because this is also a rhetorical machine, is a machine that questions the rationale and the beliefs underpinning every decision. And what are the principles through which it is sure in such a formal environment that questions are asked? There are 2 things I think that are important. The first one is having interests that are again in opposition and that they are balanced. If the dean is too powerful or if the treasurer is too powerful, there is no balance there. There is no need for 2 keys. There is no wisdom. So these tensions have to be in a position where you balance them, and you balance them through conversations that happen in that space. The second thing is that the people who sit around this table are really not only weird sometimes, but also different. They have a completely different forma mentis. If I am a tutor in management, I would think about the world in a completely different way compared to an historian of art. I mean, we really come from different worlds. There is no way that we can finally agree on one thing. We can discuss, we discuss a lot, we try to understand each other, and out of this tension, of this diversity, something good comes out. So one thing is diversity, one thing is tension. Here, there is no diversity and there is no tension. Because as we saw before, the faculty is a flashing spot trying to be heard at the bottom of the hierarchy. And why is this important for universities and places like this? Because we are a professional service firm where we should be partners. I was a partner here, I was an employee here. And above all, we are a knowledge-intensive firm. In a knowledge-intensive firm, you want to rely on the knowledge which is diffused across the organization. You cannot really believe that the top knows everything. You really have to make sure that the entire body is involved. And I said also that this is part of, this is a machine where you also find a nice balance between transparency and opacity. I have a few anecdotes that I could share here, but unfortunately it's too late. If you have time for questions, I will do that later. But this is an instrument where you nicely balance transparency and opacity. And that is important because, I'll skip this, because as Machiavelli says, the less one knows, the more one suspects. And so if we do not know what happens at the top, it's clear that everyone suspects. Now, what I wanted to do here is to show how accounting is powerful, how accounting is powerful in creating knowledge and beliefs. It does the inventory. It has been created for doing inventories. But it can also be used for invention, for questioning these beliefs, as far as we use it in the proper way, as far as we use it in the way for which it was invented. It was not invented for creating believers. It was invented to solve problems. This is what the Jesuit accountant said in the introduction to his book on double entry. He said, I'm not interested in truth. I'm not a theologian. I'm a pragmatic person. So accounting solves problem, like the guy in Pulp Fiction. I solve problem. This is what accountants do. And this intertwine, or this relationship between inventory and invention needs to be governed, and needs to be governed in a different way compared to what we have now if we want to generate social innovation. Now I know that some people in fact have asked me, how is that you have a chair in accounting, governance and social innovation? And some people also say that title is very long, why that? So I think it's time to give an answer to that, okay? So if you are German and a German doesn't know one thing, she learns it, okay? Very straightforward. If an American doesn't know one thing, she pays to learn it. This is why we are here, in fact. We have the business school. When a British doesn't know one thing, she bets on it, or he bets on it. When a French doesn't know one thing, he pretends that he knows it. When a Spanish doesn't know one thing, me da igual, he believes that he does not need it. When a Greek doesn't know one thing, he reflects on why she cannot know it, they philosophize. When an Irish doesn't know one thing, he drinks on it. Guess what an Italian does? When an Italian doesn't know one thing, he teaches it. Okay? Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Bravo, that was splendid, Paolo, fantastic. But if I could ask you about Jesuits and accounting, one of your favorite topics, I think you did say that the Jesuits were smarter than contemporary accountants. I see myself as a contemporary accountant. If you look at this from 2 points, what their practice was and what current challenges are, if you look at their practices, I think a lot of what they were about was control. And even to the point where you talk about indifference, you could see as self-control. And the idea of the two people controlling that box. So it's a very particular kind of perspective that they were bringing to bear. And it raises all sorts of issues in my mind. Then if you look at an example from contemporary practice, we have the recent experience of collateralized debt obligations, or CDOs, or more conveniently known as toxic assets, which contemporary accountants had to deal with. So there's an issue about what would your Jesuit priest accountants have done with the toxic assets?
They would have not got there in the first place. That's the answer. What you're saying, Irvin, is very right, that what they did, because one of the other comments when I give this is, nowadays we are globalized, and so we cannot really do that kind of governance, we need to do that. But what you're pointing out is very true. They had a kind of control that worked at different levels. And the word control is quite important and interesting because it's based on the idea of contra and rotulus. So you create a separation between me and myself, and I account for my sins, for instance. Or me and my peer, the cash. Or me and my boss, okay? So all of these divisions were sought on purpose, but they were not thought and sought for the same reason that we have nowadays. If I think, for instance, of the theory of incentives, I set up an incentive and that creates a division. But there is no space for making these two different parties to talk to each other. I'll see you at the end of the term, and if you meet the targets, that's okay. Okay, if you don't, that is not okay. Okay, so they had this idea of divisions, and this idea of division was there to scrutinize the future more than representing the past. And this is why I said at the beginning that they would not have got there, because they would have been too unbalanced, towards a certain way of doing things, creating an inequality that was not convenient for the survival of their organization.
I wonder if you could say something about one aspect of humanity which these ideas of balance leaves out. Greed.
Mm-hmm. They do. I forgot to say one thing that is particularly important. Here, people hate each other here and hate each other there. Greed. But there is a huge difference. Here, there is a way of managing this greed. On the other side, there is no longer a way of managing that greed, which is also an interesting thing, because hierarchy comes from hieros, which means sacred, and arche, which means rule. And hierarchy is also a rhetorical machine, is a tree, and that thing was invented not to crystallize things, but to move these boxes around to make sure that you reinvented things every time, okay? So they were not naive. I'm not saying that this is more democratic than that. This is not democratic at all. It's a venue for fight, but the fight is ruled. While on the other side, the fight is not ruled. It's left to individuals to go around and try to do things in ways which are completely unruled.
I'd like to hear your comment about situation in Greece and Germany, the Merkel and European Union now, using that accounting and the diversity of European Union, whether it's, to bail out or not.
Some other colleagues here do, financial economics or finance, and they can answer better than me. As a profane in that area, I would say if they had bailed out Greece 5 years ago, we would be much better now. But I don't have any, this is just a personal opinion rather than, this is more finance rather than accounting. In terms of the message that could be used for addressing that issue, balancing. So if you are unbalanced, you're unbalanced. In fact, we are losing the idea of a community in European Union because we are no longer balanced, and no one cares.
With regard to these spaces of governance, the left-hand side clearly indicates there's a board of directors at the top, and instructions of all kinds are issued right down to the trenches that people have to obey or should obey. The right-hand side is somewhat less clear, but it seems to me, and perhaps you'll comment on this, that it really acts like a rather large board of directors, perhaps with people who on the left-hand side would not be on that board because they wouldn't be senior enough. But having said that it probably acts like a large board of directors, what is the basic method of communication downwards from that right-hand side? It's obvious from the left-hand side, but it's not obvious to me, at least, on the right-hand side.
Yeah. You are partially right that this looks like a board of a normal company, right? The difference is that here, people are really different, okay? So there is a much greater diversity in that board that would not be present in a board of directors in a large corporation, including if you have external executive members, non-executive members. So the answer to your point is the various committees and how then these things percolate down to the hierarchy, because here there is a clear hierarchy too, okay? So I'm not saying that this is radically different from that. I would say that this, in a sense, also englobes, if that word exists in English, the idea of hierarchy. There is a strong hierarchy there, but that hierarchy is never fixed, and there are lots of chains of communication, formal like this, but above all, also informal. This is the room where also they have lunch every day. Most of the governance is done at lunch. It's not done on Wednesday every other week. And at lunch, you meet. There's also an interesting rule at Christchurch. You cannot sit wherever you want at lunch. You have to sit to the next available seat, so that every time you sit next to someone who is new to you, not to your friends. You don't sit next to your friends, because this is not allowed. No one says why, it's not written anywhere, but you cannot sit on your own. You have to sit at the next available seat, and that allows that you always meet new people.
Thank you, that was a very stimulating talk. And I'm especially captivated by your suggestion that the Jesuits lacked, or at that time there was lacking a notion of representation, hence numbers could not represent, they were. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about the historical processes by which we are saddled with the inevitability of representation, that something always stands for. And obviously Protestantism is very implicated in that. And I'm also, it strikes me in reflecting on your reflections that the current fascination with performativity is in a sense a return to an enchanted moment where things are not but just the representations.
Yep.
And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about the contemporary conjuncture by which we're rediscovering the other than representation.
I think I think your question, in a sense, it gives the answer already. We have a group, and there are some people in this room. Where is Roberto? Here he is. Which is putting together an application on modes of representation in the economy. And the idea is exactly to go back to an idea of using these visualizations as forms of reflection. And when I say this, I don't say this by chance, because in Rhetoric and Art of Memory, the metaphor of the mirror was pretty strong. And in that book written by the Jesuit, he says we have to reflect the state of our college as if we looked at ourselves into a mirror, which means that we have to reflect on what we are doing rather than using those things to tick boxes and see whether we are compliant or not. So I think when I teach this stuff to executives, they like, not exactly this, it's like different form and with more material. They love it because what is lacking in organizations in the contemporary world is the possibility of exerting judgment. So we are no longer in a position where we can exert judgment, even in teaching. Nowadays we are surrounded by so many rules that presuppose what good teaching is, and therefore teachers no longer do what they've been trained for, which is understanding how teaching needs to be done. And that is part of this crazy movement towards making things fixed and representable so that at the end you can check whether you have complied or not. And so the idea and the move towards performativity, I agree, is exactly going back to places where performances, even more than performativity, because performativity in a sense says that we do things in a certain way because there is a model that constrains us. Here there is a combination of performativity and performance. And so the performativity is never about closing the realm of possibilities, but it's always about opening up rather than closing down.
Well, I know there are people who are still would like to ask Paolo questions, but I think perhaps we should move out to the reception and ask over a glass of wine. But I just wanted to thank you once again for a wonderfully informed, interesting and exciting lecture, and I hope you'll all join me in thanking Paolo and joining us afterwards with a glass of wine and a reception. Thank you.